Good morning again. This is Paul Crammy. Welcome back to our session. Um, the agenda that we're going to cover is on the screen. We're going to look at just touch briefly on some specific examples that I have in control to illustrate some of the things that we talked about on Tuesday for area and cost-based pricing. And then after we've gone through that, and then we'll kind of step back and review some things that are important related to knowing what your hourly equipment cost rate should be for the different devices. Similarly, look at some of the things that you can do to help get a better grasp or a more accurate grasp, so to speak, on the on hourly labor rates. And then I'll illustrate and talk about some steps that you might want to consider in helping you maintain the material part multipliers, that are in control. So I'm going to bring three other documents up that I want you to that I want to show you. These are the handouts. If you look at on the control thing for the GoToWebinar, notice that there are three documents that are there for downloads. If you haven't done that, I encourage you to do so. I'm going to change my view to look at the one that we did for Tuesday. This is the one from Tuesday's session, and we're going to just I'm encouraging you to print it off if you haven't done that, because some of the examples that we're going to use are going to reference some of the attributes that are in the this first session webinar on Tuesday. So that's the first one that I want you to download. The second one is this one that looks detailed, and it is because as we go through the different examples, I want to visually be able to illustrate the impact of what it is that we're talking about. And the key is that this particular handout is geared to where we're not doing any kind of discounting and where we are discounted, taking the same exact example and illustrating the effect of the discounting in there, okay? And then the last one is kind of a, I got to change the view here one more time just to, well, it didn't change, just a second. There we go. Just a document in the event that you would have an interest in taking some steps to help you improve the efficiency in maintaining your multipliers for material. This is going to you might want to use this as a guide in how to do that. Okay, now I'm going to come back to control, and before we get started, I've got 6 estimates that are opened up here, okay? And these all are related to some of the things that we talked about on Tuesday that might be of help. So the first estimate, this 579, is just a simple example of a quantity of different quantities for 10, quantity of 10 and a quantity of 1,000 without any kind of discounting. Okay, so if you notice that the total estimated cost is the 34,000. Now, if we look at the one that is related to it, which is this next one, that's the same exact estimate with the same quantities, but with a different, that is not the one that I wanted it to be. That's because I opened up the wrong one. Hang on a second. Let me just get the wrong one. I was off by one. I wanted to get number 585. I wanted this one instead of, so this one is the one that should have been the second one. It's a related to 579 and 585 are the same exact quantities, but here we've introduced a discounting strategy, okay, based on quantity. Now, the second pair of estimates, these two are similar, but they're here we're trying to illustrate the use of the different templates for area-based pricing. Area-based pricing, where we're using a single template or a series of templates to do the printing, the laminating, and the mounting. And then the last two, so there's first one, the second one, and then these two are to illustrate cost-based pricing with a series of quantity changes without discounting and with discounting. And I'm using as my illustration the acrylic, okay, was what I chose, okay. I had some other examples for aluminum, but it really serves no purpose to illustrate what it is that I want to do. So now I'm going to come down to bring up those the graphs that I was talking about. And on the page 1 of this graph, this is the without discounting, and this is with discounting. So just to kind of give you a point of reference, these first three, I gotta get. I'm trying to reach over and grab my notes here just a second. We're trying to grab these first three items are the effective multipliers for area-based pricing, the equivalent ones if we were using cost-based pricing, and then just somewhat of an arbitrary what I call a baseline multiplier of 3 1/4. This is the cost component. This is the price. This is the cost-based price. And then we're coming on across, okay? Now, if we come down, I need to change my view here just a second. Yep, now I got the right one. So what we're looking at here, these are the effective multipliers for area, effective multipliers for cost, what an ideal multiplier would be, what the cost is, and the price. Now, those are all illustrated then graphically in a series of graphs. So this shows the baseline multiplier. If we had it at the red, I'm sorry, is the baseline. So that becomes the point of reference. Now the black is the for the area base. Now, green is the area base. It comes up here at 286, and then it stabilizes and flattens out. The cost base starts at 380 and then also flattens out. So this is intended to show you the relationship between the multipliers, whether you're under an area-based pricing scenario or a cost-based pricing. And we're trying to compare that to a kind of a normalized or baseline multiplier. We come down to the next graph. Here, we're showing the same multiplier, the 3.25. And now we're showing the impact with discounting. So this one was without discounting. The multiplier is without discounting. This is the effective multipliers after we've applied a discounting strategy. So again, the baseline, 3.25. The black is the area based, or the green is the area based. I'm sorry, I keep getting my words mixed up here. This is the graph of what happens to the effective multiplier under area-based scenario, and this is what it looks like under cost-based scenario. Coming down to the third now we're talking about the cost and the price. Come down here so we can see it. So the black represents the costs of and the cost and the gross profit. The red represents the absolute cost, and that's going to be the same under an area-based pricing with price with costing, and it's going to be the same under area-based or cost-based pricing to reflect the price or the cost. So the green then is the price, and the lower number is the gross margin. So we see without discounting, the price stays very, very stable as you're going out in this case in the terms of quantity, and the gross margin stays relatively flat as well. Now, if we come down to the next graph, here we've introduced a discounting strategy. So the cost, just like before, stays essentially the same, or it does stay the same. And now we've got the price under cost base and the gross margin under cost base, the area price and the area gross margin. And notice that as the quantity increases, the price per piece, which is what we're looking at, the price per piece stair steps down as it goes through the different increments, for discounting. And it does the same kind of thing on area-based pricing, the green. It decreases, and then the gross margin comes down, okay? This is the markup, or the price for area base, which is the green, and this is the effective price per square foot, the square foot price for cost-based pricing and area-based pricing. And then the last one is the same thing, the effective cost per or price per square foot under a discounting strategy. Now, I don't remember what the discount table, if we were to go back to control, we go back to control under setup and pricing setup, come down to the discount tables. And so this is the table that I was using for these illustrations. And basically what it's saying is that for quantities of 10 and below, there's no discount involved. 11 to 19, it discounts 12.4%. And that builds in increments of relatively narrow increments of, through here. And then it kind of begins to stretch out. So it goes from 90 to 164 is 30.8%. And then as we get out towards the end, it peaks. So that any quantity in excess of 2010 and higher, the discount percentage remains the same, okay? Now, this is a table that's based on quantity. A similar table that could be used depending on how you want to associate the and manage your discounting. This one is based on area, print area in this case. So what this one is saying is that for areas of 150 and less, 150 square feet and less, we wouldn't want to discount. So starting at 151 up through 159 square feet, 12.5%. And then it slowly builds, and then it really gets out. So 2,700 square feet and greater, it would peak at that same 54.5%. Now there are other discount strategies that can be utilized. But these are the two key ones that I have found from experience that people will tend to either discount based on area or they'll discount based on quantity. Now, I might point out that the area table likely would be different in its appearance if you were to do a lot of vehicle graphics and where you wanted to discount for the area. There you have very low quantity, but if you're doing vehicle wraps on semis or large trucks, then a table like this might be more appropriate. These increments that are here are based on semis that might be 30 some odd feet long or up to 54 feet long. And whether you're doing the one, the right side or the left side or both sides, or whether you're doing the right and the left and the rear, okay? So this table was structured more about the nature of what you're applying the graphics to. I'm going to stop here to see if there are some questions on either the graphs or looking more deeply at some of the actual estimates. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any questions, Paul.
All right. So what I think are the key takeaways, from what we just talked about, if you're using area-based pricing without costing, I would encourage you to strongly consider changing that practice. If you've been in the business for a long time and you came from a background where you were using area-based pricing in a different under different software that didn't incorporate costing, then I would encourage you to do that. you can reach out to the consulting team, and they can help with that process. Not do it for you, but guide you as far as how you can make that transition. Costing should, in my opinion, should be your ultimate objective. Whether you implement costing and stay with area-based pricing, that's one option that's viable. But the ideal one would be to make the transition to doing your costing, obviously, but also begin to use cost-based pricing. The reason that I'm saying that is that assume that you become where you're doing the costing, where you're capturing your costs. Under area-based pricing, the notion of multipliers as being a factor in determining your price doesn't exist. Multipliers have no application in area-based pricing. Rather, you have separate parameters, as we talked about on Tuesday. You may have a setup charge, may have a per original charge. You may have a price per square foot for print vinyl, or a price per square foot for laminates, or the different kinds of substrates. So in the area-based scenario, you're saying how you're calculating the price based on the combination of setup charges, per original charges, for scrap, and then the printable or the usable area, or the sheets that are involved. Under costing, you can still measure gross margin, which is the ultimate objective, being able to use control to help you understand and have a visual view of what your gross margin is on the projects that you're quoting, or the jobs that you're actually executing. Without costing, control can't be of any help in judging at the time that you're producing an estimate or an order to give you a feel for what your gross margin is. The ideal then is to migrate to cost-based pricing. Now, I'm showing some of my biasness in this regard. Cost-based pricing, in my opinion, is the ideal, because now if you change the cost of a particular material, or if your hourly labor rate changes, or if your labor rate or equipment charge per hour changes. Now, in the cost-based scenario, when those costs change, it automatically will change the price by the use of the multipliers. So if your labor cost goes from $50 to $51, the price is going to adjust accordingly based on what you have set up in control for the respective multipliers. In an area-based scenario, the costs will change, but unless you change the parameters, the area parameters, the price will not change, okay? So accuracy is the key. You want your costs to be as accurate as you can possibly get them. And you want the multipliers, if you're going that path, you want the multipliers to be the most effective. Now, historically, I have found over the years that for equipment, the hourly cost is vital. And to get accurate costs per hour of the equipment, you need to know several things, and we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a few minutes. But the multiplier for equipment historically is 2. I've seen it fluctuate slightly higher than 2. I've seen it slightly lower than 2. and that's perfectly okay. But think in terms of your equipment probably having the more appropriate multiplier that's in that 2.0 range. Now, what are the things that affect the hourly rate? And one of them is the speed of the respective devices, your printers, your laminators, your cutters, your routers, whatever the different pieces of equipment. A vital component in determining the hourly rate is knowing that your speed parameters that are reflected in control are correct. Let me just come up here to setup and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So if we go to part setup and then equipment, and I'm just going to pick a come on, there we go. I'm just going to pick a roll printer. What I'm talking about, if you come out to the machines, UDF, what I'm talking about are the speeds that are here. These are the ones that are really, really important. And what I have found from experience in working with clients and doing some analytical work with them, that many, many times these speeds that exist in control were derived from the equipment specs. If you go to the particular device and go to the manufacturer, to their website, they will likely have average speeds for different types, whether it's a single pass, a double pass, and all related to the resolution. I have found from experience that those numbers probably are on the high side, meaning that it's saying that the speed is faster than what in reality it probably should be. The only way to know that for sure is that you're really going to have to do some benchmarking, where you take specific jobs and you take the worksheet where it says what the estimated time is for particular device, and say, all right, for this particular job, it estimated this, and it was actually this. Then you can come back in and begin to methodically make some adjustments if you're finding that the control is estimating the speed too fast. Because the faster it is, the lower the amount of time that's required, which translates to understating potentially the cost. And that's going to impact the price, to be lower than what it ought to be. The other thing that's really important on the equipment side of things is what's the relationship between the speed of the printer and the cost of that, or the hours that are involved in a particular job, and what percentage should be applied to the labor side. It's not unusual in rather small shops that relationship be really close to 100%. In other words, you're implying that if the machine time is an hour, that you're going to apply for costing purposes and pricing purposes an hour of labor for this particular piece of equipment. As the shop gets bigger and maybe you have more things going on, realistically, that ratio should begin to reduce. I've seen some, like it's shown here, at 80%. I've seen it at 75. I've seen it at 50. I've seen it at as low as 25 to 30%. That's where your best judgment, if you fire up a particular job on a printer and then you go off, or the people go off and do something else, or they're maybe managing other devices, then you certainly don't want that percentage to be arbitrarily high, because that's going to overstate the cost, which is going to overstate the price. Okay, so there's a delicate balance in that regard between the equipment speed, and this is true for printers, routers, cutters, laminators, and things of that nature. Labor is kind of the same scenario. I'm going to close this and go to setup again. I should have stayed where I was. And this time I want to look at parts, but I want to look at labor. Well, let's come down here to print labor, since we were talking about it. Here, the key here is the cost. What is the cost in your particular environment? And I'll talk a little bit more about how the steps that you can take, to determine that cost, and what factors are involved in determining that. Now, very similar to equipment, generally, the markup, the multiplier for labor, also is pretty close to 2. Again, it can be higher and it can be lower. The higher your cost per hour, then you may need to think in terms of that multiplier may need to creep under the 2.0 level. So as your costs increase, what you're really implying is that for print labor, what you're saying is that if my cost is $50.50 an hour, when I'm pricing a print job, I'm introducing a billable rate of $101 an hour. And now you need to be subjective and say, what can I really get by with? At what point do I really begin to push the envelope too far? And I need to soften that markup. That's when you begin to say you need to bring it down to 1.9, 1.8. I worked with a client just earlier this week that his labor rate we determined was just shy of $53 an hour. And we felt from a competitive standpoint that his markup for the production related labor needed to be closer to the 1.6 level. Now there are also labor related parts that are service driven, design time, packaging, installation. Those I view as being value added in their very nature and may warrant a higher markup than what the production related labor might be capable of having. So for example, if I were at a 2 times markup, I would consider from a competitive standpoint to see if I could nudge the design time as a value added service up to 2.1, perhaps even higher. Similarly, know what your market rate, what's competitive in your market to help you judge what a multiplier might be for installation work. If you have a feel that your market might warrant $110, $115 an hour based on what your cost is, then that can help you guide what kind of multiplier you can get by with. You want the multiplier to be high enough to produce a sufficient level of gross margin, but you don't want to push the envelope too terribly far to render yourself non-competitive. Okay. Material now becomes a completely different ball game. I think I mentioned on Tuesday that material is all over the wall. Back when I first was doing some analytical analysis for serious banner material, for example, it was not unusual to see the markup for banner material at 10 or higher. Over the last several years, it's become far more competitive because there are more and more and more shops that have that ability. So we've seen that multiplier be driven down and down and down because of competitive pressure. So if we come in and look at the roll, need to look at my alphabet here just a second, look at banners and see what they're doing right now. Well, you can see, well, I'll get to this. We're using a custom multiplier for banner material. That's what I'm illustrating here, and that's what we'll talk about in a little bit. The default for material is at 4.5. There are some material parts that truly are justified at that default level from an efficiency standpoint. That might include print ink and other inks that you might use. There may even be some substrates that warrant to using that default. That's perfectly fine. But material has a different perceived value in the eyes of the customer. And chloroplast, is an example. Let's come up here to flat stock. I don't have any chloroplast in there. Acrylic, which is one that we've been using. Right now, it's set to use the default. I suspect that might not be is terribly competitive. Aluminum does not. In scenarios where you have multiple parts within a category, it's likely that those are going to have a similar, if not identical, markup multiplier that applies. And that's where we want to begin to introduce some efficiencies, okay? And towards the end of the conversation, I'll get into that in more detail. But my point is that on material, it's good, the markup, the multipliers are going to vary greatly. And you're challenged because of the number of parts that are involved. You have to look at things in a more streamlined fashion, probably at the category level, and say, okay, for this particular category, the multiplier should be X. For this particular material, maybe aluminum, it should be slightly different. Banner material would be slightly different. So what you're going to find, without any doubt in my mind, is that the substrates are going to demand a different multiplier from the default. There'll be some that can stay with the default, but most will not. Laminates is another good one to talk about. I have found, because you're printing something and you're likely going to follow it with lamination, that you can't necessarily follow the same strategy of a fairly aggressive multiplier for laminates. So if your default is 4.5, it's quite likely that an appropriate markup for laminates is about 50% of that, or 2.75 or 2.8. That's not actually half of the 4.5, but think in terms of a ratio between the default for material except for laminates, and those are likely going to demand a rate that's lower. Okay. we're at a good stopping point for some additional questions to see if we've got any on the notion of the markups and in the relationship between that and the categories. Any questions?
I'm not seeing any, Paul.
All right.
Okay. Y'all can raise your hand, or you can put a question in the question box at the bottom and go to meeting.
Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about steps that you can use to determine your hourly equipment rate. What I have found is that if you add a new machine, a new printer, a common step is not to add it to control. You add a printer, but you may not introduce that into control. That's one thing that I see. Second thing that I see is that you'll take an existing part of the same type, maybe a printer, a flatbed printer, and you'll simply clone that one and save it with the new name. That is a good way to get started, but you've not taken into account the other important variables that determine what the hourly rate should be. The things that you have to take into account to know that your equipment rate per hour is as accurate as you can make it. You must know how much you paid for it. You need to know what your annual maintenance cost is, either through a service agreement or out-of-pocket expenses. You need to know whether you paid cash for the machine or whether you financed it through a lending institution. And the most difficult question is, how many hours a day will that device be used? Those are all vital questions that you really need to understand and know in order to say with confidence that the hourly rate for this particular piece of equipment is $13.50. I'm just picking a number. Let's go back up and look at a printer. Okay, so the cost per hour for this printer is $15.50. So to know if that's accurate, you have to know all of the things that I just mentioned: the cost, maintenance cost, how you financed it, what interest rates you financed it at, or the lost earnings on that money. And then the most difficult question of all is, how many hours per day is that machine used? All of those combined will tell you what your hourly rate should be. Now, there is a tool that's posted on the CyrSkills website that will help you with that, make that determination. It's called an equipment cost calculator that is on the CyrSkills website. Go to training and then basic training. And then you'll scroll down and you'll find calculator tools for estimating labor and equipment. That's a category. And then there's a specific one in there that's related to equipment. There's a short video that you can watch that shows you how to use the tool. And then there is an Excel spreadsheet that you can download and use that tool for a single piece of equipment, or put a row in there for each of your devices. Talking specifically about equipment, if you're in a larger shop that has multiple roll printers, for example, and you don't differentiate at the time of pricing, or doing an estimate what printer you're going to use, you leave that flexibility to your production staff. Then I have found that a lot of the larger shops that have multiple roll printers or multiple cutters or multiple flatbed printers, they will go through the process of estimating the cost for each of them individually, but they will develop an average hourly rate and use that for purposes of pricing and control. So it simplifies it from a control standpoint, but behind the scenes, you have to be very deliberate in how you calculate what that average should be. I've seen that done for printers, flatbed printers, roll printers. I've seen it done for laminators. I've seen it done for cutters and routers, all of the different kinds of devices that the practice of averaging is not unusual. So I think the key takeaways here are, if you have equipment in your system that you're not using, please deactivate them. Mark them inactive so that you don't have to accidentally choose one when you're doing an estimate. If you add a device to to the shop, make sure that you go through the process of knowing what the hourly rate for that particular machine may be. And at the beginning, it's going to be hard to know how many hours a day to estimate. So start conservatively, and then as you gain more and more experience, come back and reuse that calculator, to adjust. I would suggest to you that you should review the hourly rate for equipment pretty much on an annual basis, because that's how you're going to know what your experience is. That's how, as far as how many hours a day are reasonable for the different pieces of equipment that you have. If you need assistance in getting, in doing the using the tool, if you're going to use the tool, reach out to one of the serious consultants, and they can walk you through the use of that tool. Or if you want to reach out to me, that's perfectly fine as well. For the cost of, in assessing some of the costs, you may have to get some of that from your accountant, people that manage the accounting. So that's the reason you'll see when you look at that tool that you got a data entry side to get the cost information, which may have to come from the accounting department. The hours per day, you may need guidance from your production manager, to help you assess that. So you may have to reach outside of whoever is trying to use that tool to get the appropriate data that's necessary. The labor rate is very similar. I'm not going to go into as much detail. There's also a labor rate calculator on the website. Again, there's a video as far as how to use it. It consists of 3 worksheets, one that the payroll person will have to address, one that may have to be addressed by the accounting department, because you have to get some costs that are not going to be readily available to whoever the person is that's trying to enter the appropriate cost of labor into control. So the sheets will show you how to do that. Now I want to finish up my discussion today on steps that you might want to consider to help improve the efficiency in managing material markups, multipliers, said another way. Let me close these down. And I want to go up to setup again and pricing setup, just as a way of quickly reviewing in the default multipliers under setup, pricing setup, all pricing. Then over here in the first column, default, this is where the default multipliers are for material, for labor, for equipment, outsourced stuff, freight, and so on. So this would be the starting point in managing the appropriate multipliers. For each of these 6 different types. Within individual categories, as I mentioned earlier, the market conditions are going to demand that not all material parts can appropriately or effectively use the default. It simply can't be done. So now, how can you make that process of maintaining those multipliers a little bit more efficient? And the technique is through what's called user constants. And specifically, I need to lean forward to find material. The concept involves creating an entry in a user constant here that I call material, M material. Then within that list, create multiple list entries, one for each of the different categories of material. So just for illustration purposes, I have aluminum. I have digital banner material. I have cold laminates. There could be one for acrylic. There could be one for wood, for PVC, and all of the other print vinyls, in laminates. All of those could have an entry in this sheet. And then you have the name of that category. And by the way, you cannot have any spaces or special characters in this. And then you're going to enter what the value is. And what this is implying is that for all of my aluminum parts, I would want to specify that each of those parts use the user constant called M aluminum to define what the multiplier is. So after you've made that initial change, then if you want to nudge the aluminum markup either up or down, you change the user constant, and then all of the parts that reference that user constant change, okay? So let me come back up to setup again. I shouldn't have closed all of them. I'm going to go to parts, and I'm going to go to materials, and let's go to flat stock, and let's go to aluminum. And then we're going to look at the cost tab, and I'm going to get into the edit mode so you can see it a little bit better. We're telling it that we're using a custom multiplier, and the name of that user constant is M aluminum. So if I had 5 or 10 or more aluminum parts in that category, the efficiency comes around by using the user constant and applying that to each of the parts the first time, one time. And then from that point forward, whenever you make a change in the user constant, all of the parts get updated. So a little bit of work at the beginning, but it's going to become considerably more efficient from that point forward. Now, I want to reference the third and last handout that I had, okay? And that one is a step-by-step process of how you can go about adopting the strategy of using a user constant to manage your markups for material. You're going to create one for each of the different categories. So the one-time steps are you need to go in and create the user constant in the name and then a value. And then you're going to save those. Then you're going to go into the parts within a given category, and you're going to come to this cost tab and say, I want to use a custom multiplier, and then enter the name. So that's the first step and the second step. From that point on, the ongoing maintenance, as I said, is to update the user constant. Now, the time investment to do that is not insignificant, but I think in the long run, it's going to save you a considerable amount of time down the road. I'm going to change views here. This is the document that I'm talking about. This walks you through the process of creating the user constants and how to go about doing that. In essence, what you have to do is you will want to export out of control the material parts. And then you're going to separate those into categories. And then you're going to export those out to an Excel spreadsheet. And you're going to calculate based on the steps here. You're going to determine what that value should be for each of the categories. And then you're going to use that value then when you create the user constant in control. So here you're getting ready to do the export. This is the actual export process and how to export it in a CSV format, how to edit it, and then come back in and begin to update those in control. Here's the table that we just talked about, okay? So there's effort involved, but to me, the advantage of this kind of strategy is really pretty simple. If you have a lot of inventory in a particular category and you want to make a change to the markup multiplier, now you have no choice but to do them each one individually. So if you invest some time up front, incorporate the user constant concept, then you can simplify the work down the line, to make a change, up or down. We're got just a minute or two left. I've covered everything that I wanted to cover. Let's see if we have some questions. I hope there are. Any questions? All right. Well, thank you all very much for joining me. I might add, I wish I didn't have to say this, but because of the coronavirus situation that we're all living with, Sirius Software is appropriately made the decision that they need to limit some things. So after this session today, the webinars like this will be suspended. I think they hope, and I certainly hope, that will be we can return to more normal state. But in the meantime, if you have questions of me, please feel free to reach out to me. If you got a piece of paper and a pencil, I'll give you my phone number and my email address, a couple of email addresses. Always, of course, your main point of contact is the consulting team at Sirius. But my information is, my name is Paul, Krame, K-R-A-M-M-E. My telephone number is area code 515-660-9882, 515-360-9882. And I have a couple of email addresses that work. The first one is through Sirius. It's P Krame, K-R-A-M-M-E, at Sirius.com. And the other one is my consulting practice. It's Paul at P Krame Consulting.com. And please don't hesitate to reach out to me if I can. I like to limit some of my stuff more to the pricing and the financial side of things. But don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have some questions or need some opinions on things. Thanks, everybody, and I hope we can get back to normal soon.
Paul?
Paula? Yeah.
Yes, just real quick. You can reach consulting at consulting@sirius.com and extension 234, the main number. Thank you, Paul.
All right. Yeah, everybody take care. Have a good time and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye-bye.